So what I'm going to talk about is a tale of two ESP practitioners, and one happened before World War II, and one happened just during last some years. So let me see. Okay, so here I'm going to just introduce some details of this recent paper appearing in JSC, and then I'm going also to try to connect with a book that introduced some fascinating stories of this Polish engineer. So I think we in this field we all know the introduction of Zener cards in the 1930s by Carl Zener and J.B. Ryan as an objective means to assess their psychic performance. And over there, so this was the standard five positions. Each position has 5 possibilities. So for this combination, we would think of about 3,000 permutations. And in this, the latest this paper published by JSC, over there, those 5 character codes would come up with about 45 million permutations for the per code. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So so here this study, and it contained a single blind test for the initial demonstration for the authors to identify or confirm a gifted child, a teenager, and then later on there are 2 studies, both double blind, and then performed in 2 different cities in China. And over here, this the sample, the double blind sample was prepared in Beijing by a friend of the lead author. And then those 2, the initial single blind, the demonstration, and the double blind laboratory tests, they were performed in those 2 cities in the eastern part of China and the southern part of China. So in terms of the demonstration and then the third their test, so this is an eastern province of China, and here is the Shanghai, and this is the Yangtze River. So over there, there is a city. This city is believed to be close to the hometown of the gifted child. And then I worked in Shanghai for several years, and then most of the cities by the southern part of this Yangtze River, I've been there. So okay, so this the demonstration city called Yangzhou. It has maybe several thousand years of history, and it has a large lake and by the river, so it was rich in terms of the literatures, cultures. So that was believed to be where it's close to the 15 years old, the gifted child. And the third demonstration was done in this city called Wuxi. It's also by a large lake along this southern border of the Yangtze River. And the first laboratory test was done in this capital city of Hainan province in the southern part of China, which has a strait from the mainland. And so this is the capital city. Where is this like that? And then at the very southern border, there was actually a nuclear submarine base of Chinese army. So that's where right now, so there are actually a lot of presence over there, just of the Western, the military presence over there. So, but you can see this submarine over there. So this is, and so here is the capital city, and right by over here, it's a tourism city, so just like Miami, like. So that's so this capital city was where the kid was invited for the first the laboratory double-blind test, and then in terms of the sample preparation, this was the information that the friend of the lead author in Beijing, she generated using Excel random the generation the function to generate there 5 codes keys, and those key were comprised of the 26 the alphabetical 24, I guess, alphabetical all the characters, and the 10 the Arabic numbers, total of 34 possibilities for each code, and then 5 codes, and then printed on an A4 size paper. So those multiple the lines, and then cut them and then fold them to 9 to 10 basically folds to completely seal that. And then so the other one was also basically stapled after it was sealed, and then it was stapled on both sides. So, and then also I believe before sealing they also had one part being teared off to make it a unique irregular key, just like ancient military the command was using basically to add additional measures to prevent the fraudulent the practices. And also on site, when the authors were conducting the measurement and the laboratory experiments, they also hand wrote numbers, unique numbers on those to basically safeguard the uniqueness of the sample and the to make sure that the experiment was right. So, and over here, so this was, so I had access to one of the videos. This was a screenshot of a couple of video the moments, but I disgraced the experimenter and also the one of the author over there, and also disgraced this, and so just apologize for this, but that's the best, the maximum that I can show and share with you guys. And but according to my understanding and the communication, this was how it was done. So it was done in a suite like the hotel rooms. So the lead also will be in the inner room, and then in the outer room and the living room, you will have a table, have the kid sitting over here, have some samples over here. They have a camera and other surveillance being just over here to make a continuous surveillance. And that kid was about 14 to 15 years old, and then the name appearing in the paper was disgraced. She was introduced to the lead author by the second author. They happen to have the same last name, but I do not know if they have any their family relationship. And then was also assisted by the third author. So in one places by this gentleman, another place is by that gentleman, or at least 2 gentlemen, and then also the kid was apparently accompanied to the testing site by her parents. And then they were known to have immigrated to New Zealand. And then in terms of the results in the analysis, we needed to come up with, they needed to come up with some objective measures. So I suggested them to use this called merit of match or merit of matchness. Essentially, we have 5 character codes, and then any code that matches will give a number of 1. Any non-matching in either way, non-matching will be 0. So in this case, it's 2 codes, two digits of the codes they match. So this will come up, just sum them up. This will give a total number of 2. So this would come up with any number of 0, no match at all, or 5, which is a complete match. So over here, so the trial begins by basically the kid was asked to do the trial, and then so just either pick up the being given by a randomly chosen sample by the examiners, or sometimes the kid will pick up her own, and then just get into their state, and then try to sketch, write down a reading. And then the reading was checked after each trial to give the agent feedback. And then would start the next trial. So each trial was completed with a confirmation of correct or not. So the agent had feedback. And then so let me go through this the results. So the paper presented the testing result first and the demonstration in the discussion, but I would like to just show here the demonstration when the lead author met the girl at the very first time and gave her 3 tasks. And this sample was prepared single-blindedly just by the lead author. And so this was the first code, and then the second code, and then the third code was deliberately made the same as the first one, and then the region of that was discussed in the discussion. And then the first one took the kid about over half an hour. It was a complete match. The second one took 6 minutes, missed 1 digit, and third one was also a complete match. So this gave the authors their confidence to move ahead. So and then so later on, so the kid and then so the leader also he funded the work. So the kid and her parents were invited to this the Hainan province to do their test. And for this test, it had 16 trials, came up with 3 complete matches. And then this was a few months later, and so in the city that was close to the kids' hometown, they conducted another trial of 18 trials, and then there were 2 complete matches, and this could be considered as declining. So when these numbers were put together, essentially only we counted the double-blind tests, a total of 34 trials, 5 digits, and then 34 permutations per position. So when you put them together, and they came up with a full hit of 5 times, and then if you put this into a binomial distribution, their odds were significantly below this number, but we just registered this number. So it was basically not explainable by any chance expectation. And in terms of my involvement, so I never met any of the authors in person, but I believe Shen approached me around early 2021. I believe he was suggested by Dr. Lepeng Jia, and then this is Edwin May. So this is the lead author, and then so basically, so they know each other, and then so I think by Dr. Jia, he introduced to me, and then so I had a communication with the lead author over the times after that. And but Shen, his hearing is significantly impaired, very difficult to have a live communication. He also had broke his bone some time ago. He recovered, but not in very good health conditions. So he discussed the cases with me, and we also discussed many other tests he did over there in China. And in most of part, we had a consensus. And he later saw my comments on this manuscript. And then after I saw the manuscript, I saw the revision, the request, and then guidance from JSC, I agreed to help. And then so we introduced this result analysis, rewrote the entire manuscript, and then after 2 more rounds of revision, and then it was published, but I did decline the co-authorship, but I was behind the final version. So with this, I also like to just introduce this. I'm having this book with me, and then so I recently got this book. It was so fascinating, and then it was written by Mary Rose Barrington, and she was a British parapsychologist, and looks like passed away last year. And then this is was the Ian Stevenson, we all know, founder of the Division of Perceptual Studies in University of Virginia. And there was Zofia Weaver. She is a native of Poland. So they documented this very fascinating stories of this Polish engineer and at a high social stand. And so that engineer, according to the book, I think he was born in Russia and had a successful business in Russia, but later returned to Poland and likely killed by Nazis around 1943 or 1944. And then he had extraordinary the abilities of psychometry and clairvoyance. So this many people with very high social standards, and then they were involved in testing him. Over there, particularly this Joseph Piasecki was the military command of Poland in World War I and later a head of the state. And then Charles Richard won the Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1913. So, and they were all just involved in conducting the studies on this gentleman's ability, and then some were, but this book documented, most of them were, probably half of them were double-blind studies, and there are also some single-blinded due to the conditions that you just couldn't prepare in advance. And also it was done during the time when French was the language of the science. So, but over here are some, so there are the psychometry part I don't want to talk about, but the clairvoyance part, basically this Stephen had to identify the sealed targets, either sketch them just by sketching them, and you can see over here, all those I marked with this orange triangle were the one sketched by this Stephen, and all the other was the original one that was basically disclosed after the Stephen made the sketches. And you can see that, so this is, there are some that were extraordinarily just a match. And here, so this, what I took over here, photographed from the book, were not all, there were others. Okay, but those were some very representative stuff. And okay, so see those shapes and those marks. And this one, I believe this one was associated with this. And so a sample was sealed in a lead, a small lead container. And then when the reading was done, and then the container was basically cut open, and then so the original sample was taken out to examine the reading. So from the records itself, so the experiments were impeccable to my understanding. And then, so I, as an engineer, I often like to see what's going on over here. So one of the favorite quote that I like to have is from Jacques Vallée. He mentioned that the science research should lead, not follow physics. And on the other hand, yesterday I was watching more, and I found this Edward Kelly of Dopes. The quotes were somehow resonating with me. So he said that, so the first take-home lesson, certainly he was associated with near-death experiences, but he was in the Ryan lab before, so he knew other psi or something related to what we would discuss today. He mentioned that in a general sense. So he said that the first take-home lesson is whether we like it or not, psi phenomena exist as facts of nature, and the science is going to have to grip with the fact of that somehow. I think we all agree upon this. And so this book also it has records of Stephen's own words. And as Stephen, he himself was an engineer. I think he was a chemical engineer probably. He would not only he was very cooperative on the experiments, he would also try to get his own idea of what was actually going on. So there are maybe about 2 pages of materials written by himself. And then here are some very important stuff, and I like to share with anyone who has interest but not yet having read this book. So Stephen mentioned that I start by inhibiting the reasoning process and concentrating on my inner forces. And I threw myself into a world of spiritual feeling. I am sure that this condition is brought about by my unshakable faith in the spiritual unity of all humanity. Then, and I find myself in a new special state where I see or I hear things right outside of time and space. So whether I read a concealed target or find a lost article or do psychometry, my sensations are almost the same. Apparently, I lose a certain amount of energy. My temperature goes up and my heartbeat becomes irregular. A feature that confirms this impression is that as soon as I stop thinking, it feels as if a surge of electrical flows through my extremities for a few seconds, something. Okay, this lasts a moment, then the true state of lucidity takes hold of me. Pictures rise up in front of me, usually of the past. I see the man who wrote the letter and know what, so just continue to go. And okay, incredulity, skepticism, or even attention concentrated too closely on my person can block a quick and successful result, or cripple the perception. So this part is highly related to sheep or goat, or their influences of their basically their sight, the person around him. And when he was performing that in the Wasa Psychiatrical the society, and all the scientists over there it was supporting, and he had a great success. So he was mentioning about that. And in the GSC paper, so also this paper also mentioned some of the readings of self-mentioning of the process by the kid, and that was except by the video clips of after conducting one of their full match. And the girl mentioned that she was able to get enough focus on the reading. The characters would appear on the so-called third eye region, would be somewhere over here, which is in the anterior domain or in the vicinity of the frontal lobe. The characters would appear once, but were unstable, and then but was unstable. Okay, so over here, so with this, and in the paper, we put that we regard this extrasensory identification against a visual sensory barrier as a manifestation of information acquisition using channels that are not yet known, basically via an alternative channel of information transfer. So I had this idea. And so there is something going on between the psi, between a live person, between the person has to get into certain way of accessing or entering the information. So what actually is going on? So I just cite more of this Edward Kelly's words. This was not the true Kelly, okay? But he mentioned something inherently larger than normally would overflow the organism in some sense, okay, and then come back to basically come to control the brain and the sense. But here is also another important quote from Robert Jane in his 1994 interview. He was projecting a resonance between the information processor that's in the device and the information processor that we carry in our mind. He certainly was regarding to the influence of consciousness on the rag, but how much is that different from because it's eventually it's a connection or interaction between mind and a matter, a physical matter. So to me, I would like to or project or hypothesize that there might have a so-called resonant state of consciousness, which may be associated with associated or alternative state of consciousness. But I consider that might be a unique way of tuning special numbers, groups of some of our brains will just the where consciousness somehow it will appear, and then that when we enter that state by some kind of feedback like meditation, hypnosis, whatsoever, and then it could somehow come back to modulate our sensory response, and then this sensory response modulation could potentially couple different sensory the systems and may also make it more sensitized. And when this happens, those can all be at the physical levels, but when that happens, maybe in a very unique way, they could be able to access some alternative information. So that's it's something that I would like to see if it's any way possible. Okay, so that is my brief, basically the review of the things I have been just fascinating me, and then I hope that this can elicit other thoughts, and then let's all work together, try to just know a little bit more of what's actually going on inside.
Okay, so when you were talking about the Polish practitioner, I was kind of taken by the description of how the process worked for him, particularly this discussion about heat and about vibration. And I found that similar to discussions that I have seen about out-of-body experiences, or also some of the subjective experiences of people who have done, for instance, the Monroe Institute. There's kind of a similar sensation in the body, and also sometimes we get this in subtle medicine. I was wondering if you have anything to say about subtle bodies or energy, and if maybe that might be something that plays into this kind of experience.
Well, I would say I can only project what might happen, and to my view, they are all connected, but in which way they are connected would be very different or difficult to understand. And in terms of the heat or heating that the Stephen mentioned, I believe that was his own the perception, but whether his body was heated up, body temperature, there is a change or not, that was really we don't know. But coming back to this the sensory or perceptive the changes over the course of this side demonstration, if we could somehow enter into a non-normal state of our sympathetic or neuronal whatever control that might be, that will definitely come back to modulate, to change our physiology. So I would be there. It would not be surprising at all that during that period, that time, our body not only feels different, but also if there is any kind of bioenergy that is being produced or changed, then it will also have a correlative presentation. And I myself had an extreme the stress conditions when I was asking a question to the former Korean ambassador to U.S. when he was presenting in my alma mater, and then I had an extremely crucifying pain at my back and my lower the back part just because I was so stressful. And then so it was extremely painful. I couldn't move. And then it was gone when the stress was gone. So that gave me just the understanding that our body and our consciousness or whatever it is, how much modulation can it do for our body itself. And then that would involve a significant amount of energy, vitality, and then that will, if that can produce any bioenergy, I'm not saying that it produce bioenergy, but I'm just saying produce any type of something we could emit or generate a change of that, it would not surprise me at all.
Thank you. So we're starting to get a few questions in, but I was wondering, because you and I have discussed before in other venues about finger reading, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the participant and the study that we see in the JSE, or even more about how subjects are recruited for these kinds of studies.
Okay, so I talked with the lead author, and then I asked him how many, how many this kind of gifted the person he was able to confirm, and he mentioned that. The lead author actually published a paper in JSC around 2010, I believe, a short paper, and over there he talked about a case of a PK. So he identified one PK, the gifted agent, and this was the second one he could identify, and he could confirm over the last 10 years. And according to him, he knows one more, which had even greater ability, but just for the sake, and then cannot be publicized as this. And so there was it's very difficult to identify because there were this science field in China, it's so much contaminated by the fraudulent practices. So it was very difficult to identify and confirm and also do experimental studies like this. So this was the only one he was able to identify over the last 10 years. That was also why after I saw this material, I felt that if I could help, I needed to help. So,
yeah. All right. So I don't know if you know this, but Sophia Weaver, who's one of the co-authors in the book that you've been discussing, is actually in the audience.
Oh, great.
And she says she's delighted to know that the book is still regarded as relevant. In the Q&A, there's also a question for Sophia. So, Sophia, if you are inclined, please, I welcome you to raise your hand, and we can bring you on stage. In the meantime, there's a question in the chat, which I'm going to go ahead and show on stage. It says, Dr. Piao, my question is whether slight changes in the set and setting or habit may help or impair participants' ability to read the character strings. For example, where it is positioned, whether the material is written on paper versus digital form.
Okay, so first I was not involved in any part of experiments. So I was only involved in revising the paper and doing the reanalysis. And I was given access to only one video of the interview after one successful full match. So I can only project information from there. And that video was about 25 minutes long. It contained that entire process from basically ending of one previous and start basically an entire process of one reading. And so it's lengthy and there are a lot of interactions over there. And I think the setting, it really depends upon what do you. So from that video, all those samples, it's put. So they are all basically, they were all stapled into a small flash drive size, all those samples, and then basically several, maybe 20, 30, they were in a small bowl and put over there on the table. And then so the kid will just sometimes it's the assistant, he pick up one, or sometimes there's a kid just try to shuffle through and pick one out. And this is later on, but at the early, this something like this, okay? And then she would just like this, just use her finger to do this a little bit, and then so sometimes they're wandering around, something like that. But so basically, she needed some kind of access. But there was one thing that's very interesting because. So this was boring, okay? You can see it was a very boring task. And the kid was only 14, 15 years old. So at the very beginning, she would basically try to, because when the sample was taken out, and then she was not allowed to touch it at the very beginning, the earlier measurement, the test. But later on, after the trust was established, the results came out, and then later on, she would try to accelerate that process by asking to be permitted to touch that. And then so that just gave her faster access. And then the examiner would ask her why you wanted to touch. She said, I just want to get this done to go out to play. So the setting itself, if you are talking about how she was access to the sample, and this was the only information I had, but in terms of how their codes or which kind of objects were sealed, what's the process of sealing, I don't think that matters if such kind of the phenomena or ability is a true phenomena, because if it does access the information or by overcoming the barrier as we normally know, and then none of the physical barriers will be able to block that information. So that's my own perspective, and thank you.
I find it interesting, though, that the subject said that she really wanted to touch the target. What kind of sensory barriers or what kind of controls were in place to prevent cheating in that case?
Well, that one I don't know, but I believe in this field we all know about the thermal vision kind of experiments did earlier on. So if a touching can provide an access to that information by whichever means, that part I think is in agreement with this thermal vision experiments that have been done by so many people over so many years.
Okay, I'm going to invite Sophia to the stage.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Sophia.
Okay, no, I was just going to say I agree. I think it's very much to do with the mindset of the person, of the clairvoyant, what they are comfortable with. I mean, Ossowiecki firmly believed for a long time that he couldn't read print. Turned out that he could, but it was a barrier that he had to overcome in his own mind rather than existing barriers. So I think that applies to most clairvoyants that I have studied. It's the mindset that they bring with them, and that's the main thing that inhibits any developments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sophia, I wonder if I might keep you on stage for another moment for our very last question.
Yeah.
Q&A. The question is, what types of probabilities against chance did the young Chinese woman versus the Polish engineer achieve?
Well, I think chances are something that can be worked out if you have a framework like they do with remote viewing, where they have set of targets and then they can judge the hits against misses and work out the result that way. I think it's much easier to do with numbers, than with basically what was a live situation in the case of the Polish engineer. And Risha did try to work out the probability of Ossowiecki getting hit the way he did. And of course, he ended up with basically infinity. But it wasn't really the kind of probability working out that we are used to now. I hope that helps.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Daqing, what's your take on the question?
Well, so this probability, I think if there is a definitive probability, just like these numbers and the characters, which there is a known and the total amount of permutations, and this probability can be assessed objectively as we have over here. And but so there is the probability of the Polish engineer. It's a little bit difficult to assess because that's mainly kind of a visual information of a shape or that type of stuff. But that type of probability actually, it's in terms of information transfer, there is no one way to assess that. And actually, that part has actually been done in China in about 40 years ago. There were people studying what's the reliability of information particularly a spatial pattern that can be picked up by the clairvoyant or people who can access that information by something like this, finger reading, whatsoever you want to call that. And then surprisingly, so that and that part of the assessment is there is a standard name called the modulation transfer function, which is used to identify how good this camera system is identical. Over there, it was found that this kind of psi ability is good at picking up information that is not very highly detailed, but also not very plain. So which means, for example, I have a paper over here which has very detailed sketches and then very fine lines. They cannot pick up. But if I have a plain paper like this, they couldn't find out either, which give me an idea that if it's a plain paper, there was no interesting information there, so they couldn't pick it up. But if just like our camera, if the line is too fine, we can't pick up either because there is the resolution issue. So that study, so given a curve like this, somewhere in the middle, not very detailed, but not also very plain, I think that would agree with that there is some kind of information transfer there that does break the physical barrier, but that the amount of information that is being transferred does not disagree with our known physics. It's just a matter of how it's transferred and then which kind of information that is being accessed. So I would say the Stefan's that the chance capabilities is not as direct as this 15-year kid. Her information, the chance probability we could project. Over there, that probability needs to be assessed according to this standard. If we could bring him back alive to redo the test, and then can be assessed by this type of standard approach, which is used also to compare modality by modality in medical imaging, ultrasound, MRI, CT. It was done in this way, standard way. So there are something over there. We just needed to implement to this field to make it stronger, scientifically more sound. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sophia, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't think that. I have found that very interesting, and I'm really glad somebody noticed Ossowiecki again, because we tend, in parapsychology, we tend to start all over again and forget everything that went before. And I really like historical things. Thank you. That was very
I
interesting. And Margaret has sent me a message, and I will. I've got the message, and I will reply with the information. So,
Awesome.
but I can't work out the messages bit. So, but
It's a little tough.
I'd say it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you
Thanks
for
a lot,
joining
dear.
us.
Pleasure.
Okay, well, that is it for our Q&A and for our questions. So thank you again for joining us, Dr. Piao, and thank you for the presentation.